Hey y'all, what's up? Welcome back to another episode here on the Matt Nostalgia Show, where we talk about real resilience. And today, I wanted to discuss this concept of duality, mental duality, hypocrisy, actually, would probably be the best singular word to use to discuss what we're going to be talking about today. So it kind of stemmed, like, the questions that came from this. I wanted to answer some questions, and I wanted to mull over some answers. And I don't even know if by the end of it, if we'll have any clear, definitive, this is reality, this is what is, because life tends to be more gray than that. But people tend to gravitate towards easy answers, straightforward concepts, and working within a sense of nuance is not something that a lot of people want to do. But I think that the people that come here and join us for these conversations, they're interested in a little bit more. They want a little bit more depth. They don't want the 2 quick steps to lifelong happiness. Like, that's just not the way it works. But so how does hypocrisy come into this idea of mental agility and resilience and overcoming obstacles? Well, it kind of stemmed from this trip that I took to Monticello with Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson's home. And it was, Thomas Jefferson is one of my all-time absolute favorite founding fathers of the United States. Naturally, our understanding of Thomas Jefferson and who he is and his contributions typically revolve around the Declaration of Independence, since he was the key author of it. But we'll dive more into him and that specifically. But some of the things that I was thinking about when going over the concepts for this episode and the ideas and kind of the flow I wanted to take is what's the importance of consistency and hypocrisy, right? And is there a real you, right? What is the authentic you? It's one of those, like, overused terms now, like personal brand, but authenticity. We want to be authentic. How do we be authentic? And it's so funny because it seems like such a counterintuitive way to go about thinking about authenticity is to bring it out into the open and ask the question directly like that, because then the way our minds work is we immediately go to start kind of filling in the blanks, and it's like, okay, well, if I'm thinking about this completely, I'm going to be filling in the blanks in a subjective way, in the way that maybe I want to view myself in my authentic self versus the way that I really am. Maybe I focus, depending on your personality type, maybe you focus heavily on your weaknesses and the things that you're not where you want to be, in the sense of how you manage relationships or things like that, or maybe you're the type of person that really focuses on your strengths, and so this authentic version of yourself, this avatar of yourself that you would sit down and create in this exercise would be skewed, and naturally it's going to be skewed, and so like, is that even an effective way to discover authenticity? And so these were the questions that I was kind of mulling around. And so today, like I said, I want to talk about what it means to be consistent. What are the pros and cons of consistency? And like I talked about with Thomas Jefferson, good old American history to help drive the points home. And so when we think about consistency and kind of like the importance thereof, how do we determine, why do I say that consistency is like a key tenet of our mental status, of where we try to be? Something that consistency is interesting because it is something that as human beings we all strive to be. We all admire consistency. We watch movies where the main character will have to stand up for what they believe in, even in the face of adversity, and staying consistent with their principles, staying consistent with the things that they value. And we look at people that in movies and shows and in our lives who get a modicum of success or get a lot of success, and that those personal values shift, right? And these are like tend to end up being the bad guys, or maybe it's the hero's journey where he's going up and he gets up on top, but when he's on top he screws up or she screws up, and then they fall down because they aren't consistent with their values, with their quote unquote authentic self that got them there in the first place. But it is an intrinsic trait that is held within all of us. And one of the things that aided in our own particular path of evolution, when you think about it, because one of the things that really had us stand apart from the rest of the animal kingdom was the division of labor, right? Our ability to make tools. Opposable thumbs are really nice. We're not the only ones with those. But then our creation of tools, we're also not the only ones that create tools. But we found early on an effective way to distribute labor, to have people focus on things that they're good at, things that are kind of in their wheelhouse, and say, okay, well, if you guys collect firewood and you over there go and forage for berries and root plants and maybe even small game, okay, cool, and then you guys go get water, and then you guys go out and go hunting, and we'll bring it all back together. So now we got berries, we got potatoes, we got meat, we got wood for the fire, and we're able to make this work because we've divided the labor. Now imagine the group sticking together as one and trying to bounce from one component of that to another. Okay, well, for everyone, we're going to go and get wood. After we get wood, then we're going to go look to hunt. And after we hunt, we're going to go get berries, or whatever the case may be. It's a far less effective system, and you're going to spend so much more time in the collection phase versus having all of these things happening kind of simultaneously. But where does consistency fall into this? Well, you can't operate in an effective system of division of labor without there being consistency. Consistency being that when this group goes out and forages, we know that they know where the berries are, and they know where to look, and what type of environment and where we live produce the most berries. And so when they go out, they're consistently bringing back a harvest, if you will. And the people that hunt, they understand how to hunt, and they're going out and they're doing that consistently. So they're consistently bringing back meat, even if they come back and they have trips or expeditions, if you will, where they come back empty-handed. There's still the consistency of, that they're going out, that they understand how to hunt, how to bring an animal down, how to prepare the meat, and work through this cycle. And so even if it's not, consistency does not equal success. It just means that we know that what you're doing, and when you keep doing that, you're gonna bring back some form of goods to us to keep the group alive, right? And so if you're not consistent, right, that's how people would, that's how you shift groups, right? Like, so I was actually just watching Yasmin and I are going back, and we're watching Mad Men. And I love this show. I watched it a few years back, 2017, and I love it. But obviously, after time goes by, you forget a bunch of it. And so we're watching it now. We're in the second season, and if you guys aren't familiar, Mad Men is a term that's used to describe the guys and gals on Madison Avenue back in the 50s and 60s who ran advertisements. And so the main character, Don Draper, is he's like the creative director, so he's like coming up with the ideas for the advertising. And they have their art department that's coming up with the sketches, and so they're coming up with the taglines and their campaigns, if you will, for different companies and their product lines. But I remember I bring this all up because there was a scene that happened in one of the recent episodes that we were going through, and where he gets a new secretary, and she's not very good, right? She doesn't manage. She says, "I cover for you all the time." He's like, "You don't cover for me. You manage expectations," right? And so like she brings in the wrong paperwork. She doesn't provide that overhead cover for him when he's off screwing around, watching movies in the middle of the day, going out and meeting up with some of the clients' wives. He's not she's not doing well enough, and her performance isn't. It's consistently bad in that way. And so, but she was a really good. What do they call them? Like they're like the ladies that back in the day when they had to switch the plugs to make phone calls. She worked in that room, and so she's like, "Hey, go back. Like, you're not fired. You're just being moved back over there." So it's like if somebody was foraging berries and like, "Man, I think I can hunt. I think I can go out there and I can hunt those animals," and they're like, "Oh," and everyone's like, "Okay, like we definitely need more people there. We have enough people over there. Let's see what you can do." And they go out, and they are terrible. Like they're just they can't figure out how to sharpen a spear. They're not listening or communicating with the team. They can't keep up. And over a period of time, it's like, hey, you're not providing the consistency in performance that we need in order to accomplish these tasks. And so I think that's where a lot of this stems from, is that consistency is kind of like a form of trust building, right? It's like your consistent performance will inherently build trust. If I do the same thing over and over and over again, and I'm bringing back results, even if they're not stupendous, miraculous results, but if I'm doing this over and over again and I'm bringing back result, then over time I'm creating this sense of consistency. Like, what you can expect from me. I'm going to work this much. I'm going to bring in this much value essentially to the group. So when and I was thinking about this in like the military sense, right? Because like I remember Adam and I in the Matt and Adam show, we talked about how to build trust and how to rapidly build trust. And in the military, we do this all the time. It's kind of like the name of the game. We have to rapidly develop deep and meaningful relationships. Otherwise, the kind of system doesn't really work. And so, but this is the exception and not the rule. It seems like there's a teeter-totter, there's a balanced scale of time and suck, right? Like really hardship events that you have to deal with and overcome, and it's really, really important to develop those relationships and develop that trust being developed by your consistent performance within that crappy suck situation. And then there's time, right? So like the more the suck, the less time to develop, and in the middle, that kind of the fulcrum is almost like that's the relationship, that's trust. And so if you go through a horrible situation, then you can really develop deep and meaningful bonds with people by performing consistently, by doing your job and showing up and creating value in the face of suck. And when you have a team of people that are doing that, it can really bring together that group. And then vice versa, right? So if you flip it and there's not that much, there's like tiny little bit of hardships, but it's over a very long period of time, and it's so we have a bunch of time weighing this side down, and we have kind of not consistent hardships, and the suck is not so bad. Then you can you can develop relationships that way. It just takes more time. You have to consistently show up, when those hardships do arise over time, right? And that's where the core of the importance of consistency comes from. Consistency builds trust. Trust is like the core element of human virtue and of establishing any type of relationship. And we are social beings. Like, we operate in communities. We've never been independent individuals operating by ourselves. Like, we may operate autonomously within a social structure, but we need to bring value because there's a division of labor. It is very, very, very difficult for you as an individual to do everything you need to survive on your own. Is it possible? Yes. Is that how we have evolved? No, it's not. And so it's just important to recognize that. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just the thing that is what it is. So when I wanted to look at some examples of when consistency, when we fail at being consistent, when we fail at these moral values, because it is as important as this is, and as important as we all agree that consistency is, not even outwardly expressed most of the time, but just intrinsically, we understand, like I've described, and founded in evolutionary causes, why consistency is so important to us as people, but how absolutely god-awful we are at it in practice in day-to-day life. This is the first one I wanted to give an example of common hypocrisies. It's a funny one, so I want to start with a little bit of levity. So you take a vegan, right? And I'm not hating on vegans. You do you. My sister's a vegan, and she's a great person. Like, those two things aren't counter to each other. So if you are a vegan or a vegetarian, and the reason behind it isn't like solely health, isn't like I'm doing this because it's better for me, and you're doing it because there's a moral concern for whatever reason. I don't care. Like, I'm not going to dive into the moral reasons why people are vegans, but most of the time, if not all of the time, there is some sort of moral element to that dietary choice. Whereas most other dietary choices, if you go keto, paleo, whatever, like, those are typically more health-based and justified by health. Veganism and vegetarianism tend to err on the side of moral decisions, which is great, right? Like, I have identified something that's important to us. Whether you don't like factory farming or whatever, you don't want to kill animals for the sake of your life, whatever the case may be, there's some sort of moral component to this dietary decision. So when we think about that, if you're trying to avoid killing animals because killing animals is immoral, but you use exterminators or pest control around your house in order to keep the pests and varmints, from entering in and allow you to go into your backyard and enjoy leisure time with your friends outside, and you don't want to be, messed up by ticks, and you don't want Lyme disease, right? And you don't want to be stung by bees or wasps, and so you have these people come out and do it. Well, there's a very clear hypocrisy taking place, that you are willing to disrupt the natural flow and placement of these bugs and insects and even small rodents and snakes for your leisure time, really. And so right there, but I'm sure that many vegans don't do that, right? Because they see that that's an obvious contradiction, and we all disdain contradiction. So maybe you don't. Maybe there's vegans out there who don't use pest control and try to not kill any bugs or step on any spiders inside of their house. I'm sure those people exist, right? But you got to think about, how do all of those vegetables get to your table? Are you personally farming all of your grocery needs, all of your vegetables, all of your produce? Is all of that coming from you? Or are you getting it from a grocery store, from a Whole Foods, from whatever? Even a farmer's market. Well, what are those farmers doing? Right? They have tens of hundreds of thousands of acres, and they have to maintain that. Well, how do they ensure that they get good crops? Well, they use pesticides. How do they get the land transitioned from wherever they're at to producing crops for harvesting? Well, they have to clear it. So in the process of clearing this land, they have to till it up. And then when they're tilling it up, all of these groundhogs and all of these rabbits and all these fox dens getting tore up, right? And then they have to make sure that they're taking proper action to not allow those animals to come in and interfere with the crops once they're growing, because it's food, and those animals out there see a feast in front of them. They want to come eat it. So in order for them to protect that food so it can get to that farmer's market table, so it can get to your kitchen, they have to stop those animals from doing it. Well, how do you think they do that? It's not with honey. I promise you that. I promise you that. So that is just one example of kind of a living hypocrisy that we deal with today. Now, another one, a little less fun, I guess. I mean, maybe that wasn't fun for you if you were a vegan, but you'd be aight. So, another example. So, you tell people that, you shouldn't smoke. Smoking's bad, and it's hazardous to your health. And I don't understand why people would smoke. The FDA will tell you that 480,000 people die a year as a result of smoking. But maybe you're one of those people that texts and drives, right? And so even, checking an email, looking at a notification, flipping to the next song, taking your eyes off the road, right? Like being distracted driving. And so we look at this, we're like, okay, well, I mean, doing that and smoking are two very different things, right? So what is it? 48, but I have it. I think it's something like 48, or maybe it was 38. Just about 40,000 people die a year in car accidents. Right? So that's way less than 480,000. So, right, texting and driving is less bad than smoking. And that's great. And smoking, you have the issue of secondhand smoke that can affect other people, and that's not good, right? Then we're, without the consent of others, we're bringing harm to them. But let's dive into this a little bit further. So, are you being consistent? If you're this person, if you're the person who disdains smoking but will check the email, send a text message while driving. Let's go back to the smoking and the secondhand smoking. Well, how is our society mostly structured now? Now that we've changed it, you can't smoke inside. You can't even smoke in bars. There are designated, and even outside, it's not free reign smoking. Usually there's designated smoking areas. So where you're smoking is around other people who smoke. And so the people that are getting that secondhand smoke are people that are taking first-hand smoke too. So the concern there isn't really as valid as maybe we perhaps thought initially. And then we think about texting and driving. Well, if I text and drive, like, what happens when I get into a car accident? I'm hitting another person. Perhaps I'm hitting a family even. But even if it's just one other person, that is a direct result in damage and physical harm through your activities, and potentially death, potentially paralysis, affecting them for the rest of their lives, affecting their families for the rest of their lives because you were sending a text message. But hey, you don't smoke, right? And smoking's bad. It's just another one of those inconsistencies, right? Where like we value safety and we value the concern for other people because smoking would be fine if it was just you, but it affects other people. Like, well, yeah, so does texting and driving. But I'm sure there's people out there that neither smoke nor text and drive. Sure, I'm sure those people exist. The last kind of cursory example I wanted to give was this time when I was in the military, and I was in Arizona at a college, if you will, one of our professional training institutes, and I had a room. We were in like a barracks, and I got a roommate, and he's squared away dude, like values following orders and values military regulation, and especially when it comes to like the dress code, right? Like you should be professional, you should look professional, your uniform should always be straight, like no crooked name tapes, no crooked unit patches and things of that sort. Now, like you are a walking ambassador of the United States Army and really the military, and so you should represent yourself in that way. So he would go, I remember we'd be in class and he'd go up to other people like, hey, your name tape is crooked, and he would never really be a jerk about it. He would be kind of behind people's backs to me in the barracks room. Like he would just vent and be like, oh my God, I can't believe all these people are here at this institution and they're all looking for the promotion to the next level, and they're walking around with jacked up uniforms. I'm correcting people every day, and I'm like, yeah, man, some people value different things, but I agree with you. Like you should be representing yourself in the best way possible. And the first thing people see is the way you look. And you are an ambassador. And so, and even inside of the military, if you're never wearing your uniform outside, you're still an ambassador of like your unit to other units, especially in a school like this. And even if you're in just at home base in your own unit, there are other units there too, but you're also an ambassador of yourself and your own professional military bearing to the people that work around you. And that sets an expectation. So if you're consistently showing up in a poor uniform, it sends signals. If you're consistently showing up and your uniform is crisp and it is taken care of, well maintained, and your haircut is always tight, and like those kinds of things, like that leaves an impression. That consistency lets people know like you value following military regulation and showing up and being professional. So interestingly enough, one morning we got done. We go out and do PT, do physical training, doing a run or bunch of push-ups, whatever the case may be that day. And we get back to the room, and I don't remember. We were showering, we're getting ready to go to chow before we head to class for the day. And I see him. He's getting dressed, and he's got his uniform on, he's got his pants on, and he's putting his socks on. And I look, and he's putting on white socks. And so, those of you not familiar with the military might be asking, well, so what? Most socks are white, aren't they? Well, yes, but not in the Army. I don't remember at this time if you could wear green or black socks. I think it might have just been, it doesn't really matter. The point is, he was wearing socks that were absolutely not approved to be worn in uniform. They're approved to be worn for PT. They're not approved to be worn in uniform. So he was directly out of regs. and it's one of those things that's like really egregious too. Like if people catch it, it's like, for whatever reason, that thing is like, oh, like that's a big deal. Like it's not like a crooked name tape. It's like you're wearing the wrong socks. And so it's hard to explain why that's like such taboo, but it is. And so I saw him and I was like, hey man, what's up with the white socks? And he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, you can't wear those, dude. Like it's, you gotta wear green ones or black, whatever. And he's like, yeah, well, no one sees. I wear them all the time, and no one sees these. It's not like a glaring, obvious, out there, open example of a uniform violation. And I brought him. I was like, dude, you're the one tearing people up left and right for their uniform stuff. Like that's, and like he acknowledged the hypocrisy there, But he deemed it as on a different level because, you can't see this one versus other people walking around and their flags are like upside down. And when people do that, it's like if a flag is upside down at a military installation, it's a sign of distress, like the base is under attack. And so we were like, hey, are you okay? Do you need to see somebody? Like, oh my gosh, like I put it on in the mirror or whatever. Like, not that would make a difference upside down or not, but it happens. It's kind of funny. But anyway, that is just another fun example of my own personal run-in with this form of hypocrisy. And so, but the thing, and that the point of these stories isn't, I'm not trying to make people who choose a vegan diet feel bad or tell them that they're wrong, or that they're bad people. And I'm not trying to say that for people that would encourage people not to smoke, or people that have military uniform violations. I'm not passing judgment, although I did a little bit on my buddy, my roommate, admittedly. But my point is that nobody's 100% consistent, right? That's not a thing. It's impossible. And trying to be 100% consistent actually, I believe, makes you incredibly rigid, and actually prone to very significant failures or shortcomings in what was possible in your life. When we take this back to like the brain, back to like a thought process level. And so, I mean, right now you're probably asking yourself, like, is it really that serious? Are you really saying that in order to be successful or to make a difference in the world that you need to be a hypocrite? No, not exactly, but in a way, kind of. In order to be successful, you got to be a hypocrite. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm getting. That's the lesson. If you walk away with nothing else from this episode, it's that. So you can just hit stop now and just move on. No, please don't do that. That's let me bring this in full circle. So if you follow me on social media, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you'll see that my wife and I just recently endeavored 2 days ago to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's boyhood house. Not boyhood, adult, his home. And then it's actually where he passed and where he is buried. And so for those of you that are like moderately familiar with American history, then you will probably already know where this is kind of going. But let me walk this in for those of you. Now, I know we have a global audience, and Thomas Jefferson probably isn't like top of mind for our friends in Indonesia or Singapore or the Philippines, where we get a lot of our audience, which is really cool. So let me give you kind of a brief introduction of Thomas Jefferson. So beyond being one of my favorite American founding fathers, he is probably one of the most historically relevant cases when it comes to a strong case of duality or hypocrisy. He's really well known, like I said in the beginning, for his authorship of the Declaration of Independence. Even though he did a first draft and then went through and it got edited by a couple other folks that were big deals back in the day. I think John Adams and James Madison might have come in with some other verbiage. But he was also Secretary of the State. I think he was the first one. I think he was George Washington's Secretary of State. And then he went on to become vice president after his defeat by John Adams for the role of the second president. And then he went on to become the third president of the United States. One of his biggest accomplishments was actually the Louisiana Purchase, right? And so we think about Louisiana, it's like a state now. And so we think about that like, okay, well, how big of a deal could that have really been? Well, that Louisiana at the time was actually would double the territorial holdings of the United States. It would expand our American borders from taking this huge massive land from France, and adding it to the United States. And this landmass would become 15 states. What was it? It was like 827,000 square miles of land. And so why was this a big deal? Like, okay, he acquired a bunch of land, whatever. But not only did he acquire that land, he acquired it for $15 million. And now your reaction might be like, okay, well, is that like, that's probably a lot of money back in the day. Well, let me tell you, I went and did some homework, and I busted out the calculator. So, $15 million in 1803, I believe that's when that purchase took place, is $432 million now. And she's like, okay, well, that's a fair bit of money, for a bunch of land, especially, back then, 15 million. And so, but I wanted to break it down further. And so that's about $18 of 1803 money for a square mile. That's $432 today. And so you think, okay, well, how many people understand the value of land right now? And so I'm like, okay, well, let me look up the value of land today. Well, at least as of 2020. And it was really as of 2019, but there was no difference between 2019 and 2020 when it came for an average parcel of land in the United States. So the average cost for an acre of land in the US was something like $3,000 in 2020. So that's a big difference, right? When we think about the purchasing power of that money today, $3,000 for an acre versus $432. And if you didn't catch this, there's an inconsistency, get it, in this comparison, because I switched modes of land, right? We were talking about square miles, and now I'm talking about acres. Like, well, for those that aren't familiar with the difference between those, I wasn't. I knew that an acre was smaller. I didn't know by how much. Apparently, it's by a lot. And so an acre is 0.0015625 of a square mile. So for $432 of today's money, you could buy a square. It was the cost of a square mile, versus $3,000 for 0.0015625 of a square mile. For $3,000. That's, oh my gosh. So it was a very, very big deal, bought very, very cheap. And so this was significant. This had shaped the United States. It reshaped, it doubled the land holdings, doubled the territory, pushed us way out west. Very big deal. And it brought in my home state of Nebraska, which nobody knows about because it's in the middle and it doesn't do a lot. But I love you. I love you, Nebraskans. Don't get it wrong. Okay. I'm going to cut my Jefferson stuff off right there because I could go on about him forever and ever. But I wanted to take this moment to shift back to the premise of the conversation: duality, hypocrisy. So let's start small. Thomas Jefferson actually had created this 10 rules of order or 10 rules of life, depending on where you look at your sourcing. I'm not going to go through all 10, but it's stuff like, I'll go through the first 3. So never put off till tomorrow what you can do today. That seems reasonable. That seems very good. Never trouble another for what you can do yourself. I like that too. Self-sufficiency, rely on yourself. Never spend your money before you have it. Now, this is one I put in bold because Thomas Jefferson was well known for being highly in debt. He actually died with something like $106,000 of debt, which, again, translated to today's US dollars, is something like $2 million. So he died with $2 million in debt. So cutting straight to the point with this, with that debt, he did inherit a lot of that debt, and which, is one thing, and he spent a lot of time, money, and energy to get that dwindled down to nothing, but then he accrued a bunch more debt. And he liked the finer thing. He appreciated education, so he was constantly investing in scientific equipment and experiments and books to learn, a lot of books. So books aren't that expensive. When you buy hundreds or thousands of books like he did, that's a lot of money, right? And so a lot of these were choices. These were choices that he did with his money. Now, this idea, this concept, this hypocrisy of debt might be something that it might be like small fries to you guys, and I'm sure that those of you familiar were not thinking that I was going to go there with this debt, right? You were thinking I was going to go somewhere else. Well, I'm going to go there too. I wasn't holding back. I'm not going to hold back on old TJ, even though he's one of my favorites. I won't hold back. So most of the time, Thomas Jefferson gets kind of raked over the coals and given a really hard time because he was the one that wrote this. I'll read this out real quick. The part of the Declaration of Independence. He says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, notwithstanding that these words were not wholly his, but restructured after the initial draft, right? He wrote life, liberty, and property. Yep, because that was a really big deal. But then he had slaves, right? So he wrote that all men are created equal, and he held slaves. He held a lot, like 607 over his lifetime, I believe it was. And given he inherited like 150, 160, something like that, but he still subjugated more men to the depravities and dehumanization of one of the worst things that you can do to another human being, which is enslaving them. But you got to bear in mind that Thomas Jefferson also wrote this. And this is actually in the Jefferson Memorial on the wall for him in Washington, D.C. And it says, "God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. Commerce between master and slave is despotism. Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than that these people are to be free. Establishing the law for educating the common people, that it is the business of the state to effect and on a general plan." So he even wrote, like, he fought for abolition, like, and this was early. Jefferson, he wrote the second legislation of Virginia, which is consistently set. Virginia's laws have consistently kind of set the standard and the motion for the country at that period of time. So basically, whatever they did was going to, in some way, shape, or form, be modeled throughout the rest of the country, at least somewhat. And in his draft legislation, he wrote for the abolishment of slavery, and unfortunately, that didn't make it. That didn't get passed, and they had to take that out. And I don't remember specifically why. I think it was appeasement because they understood the implications of the Virginia legislation on the rest of the country. They were really worried about isolating or creating division between the North and the South, because they really were trying to bring everyone together and keep some sort of cohesion and let the country actually become a country. It was not going to be possible with the division of the North and the South. They had to have both. Otherwise, it would have collapsed and we would have been taken over. So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that had to get cut. And it actually there were parts in the Declaration of Independence where he talked about it, and those got cut too. But I want to go back to his debt, because I didn't bring that up as just a coincidence, happenstance, an easy way for us to walk in. His debt was important because slaves were not seen as people, but rather as commodities, right? They weren't viewed as human beings. It was just like, it was a product that serves. And they weren't just commodities. They were some of the most highly valued commodities available at the time. And even in Jefferson's own words, he said, where was it? He was discussing the far superior value of a slave woman having children versus the value of full-grown male slave working in the fields or whatever, however they would employ them. Because the value of slaves, like each slave has a value on them, and the more that you have, the more value that they have. And the value of a slave is more valuable than the labor that they produced at that time. With these people being so highly valued, and not as people, like I said. I mean, with Jefferson's debt weighing him down so unbearably, he had to find ways to legally circumnavigate the law in order to try and protect his slaves. He did understand the evils, like he talked about, America will be smited. He talks about how slavery is going to be the ruin of the country. And so he did everything he could secondarily to his desire to spend money he didn't have, violating his third order rule of life, to continue his experiments, continue learning. That was his primary, and his secondary was trying to take care of the slaves. And so he refused. He did almost everything in his power to keep them from entering into the slave trade. And so why would they enter into the slave trade? He's the owner. Why would they go out? Well, he was in debt. And his creditors could show up and say, hey, you're in debt. We're collecting your slaves, and we're going to put them on the market. And so there were different ways to do it, and I get too in depth. You could like mortgage them out to other people and have them go, oh, no, my slaves are over there working for these people, and they're paying me, and I can use that money to pay you, kind of a thing. But, and this was the crazy part, why didn't he just free them? Like, well, slaveholders could not use verbal conveyances or emancipation to prevent slaves from being seized by creditors. This was law back in the day. And so, you say, so what? Like, break the law, do what's right, follow the people. And this goes back to the concept of, can you be successful without being a hypocrite? Well, if Jefferson had done that, that was during his... if he tried to do it early, then he would have been put in prison, and all of the things, he probably never would have wrote the Declaration of Independence. We don't know the fallout that could have happened from his consistency. Had he been consistent, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have been. I'm not saying it was right for him to keep the slaves. I'm just saying that like his lack of consistency resulted in very powerful changes in the development of a country that would eventually free people and eventually become the leader of the free world and set the example for hundreds of millions of people globally to billions of people globally, embracing democracy and freedom and individual personal value. Is that worth the lives of 607 slaves, or even more, that could have been freed if he would have been able to work through and really prioritize abolition? I can't say. Like, I won't say. It's too profound. It's one of those things that you have to mull over, and it just kind of sits with you. Like, at this point, it is what it is. You can't change the past. You just have to look at the people for what they were and understand that had he been consistent with his moral standings, then that would have changed the course of his life in a way that may have changed the course of the world, right? Which is, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about. And that's what I mean when I talk about being, that was one of the examples that I give about being overly rigid in your thinking. And that kind of goes into, like, if you're trying to be overly consistent in the workplace and you're not willing to shift processes or individuals to different parts, to different like sections, or you're not looking for different ways to operate that are more effective because you know these ways and they've worked for you consistently and you don't want to change things up, and then you end up falling behind and other companies that are innovating and pushing. If you stick too hard, if your consistency is focused on on aspects that should be malleable, then you can find yourself kind of trudging through the mud. So it's important to understand your principles and values and stick to them, but not to let those values impact kind of like day-to-day operations or processes. Processes should be consistent to the end that they produce value, but your principles should be the most consistent thing, and those should drive the processes. And so if the processes need to change in order to continue to serve those principles and those moral guidings, then that's the way that flows better. And that's really the main reason and the main moral of the story, if you will, that I wanted to get to today, is that one, we're not perfect and we shouldn't strive to be perfect. Consistency can actually stand in the way. It's very important to be consistent. It's also very important to be open to change and to remain mentally agile. And so think about that in the way that you perform in your family, in the way that you perform in your own life with your friends, at work, in your business. Like, think about where you can be agile versus where you need to be consistent. Are we putting consistency as a priority on the correct things? Or are we being too in the weeds and actually holding up what could potentially be innovations and new leaps and bounds of progress because we strive for that consistency? So, like I said, I didn't think we were going to walk away with too many answers today, but I did want to walk away with some questions and a chance for us to look at our lives a little bit more closely under this lens. So again, thank you guys so much for coming and spending this time with me today. I truly appreciate it, and I cannot wait to see you here again next week for another episode on the Malice Sally Show.
I'm just sitting here, I got time.